Hi, my name is Martin Purnell and welcome to Off-Grid Christianity, a weekly podcast for people who feel disconnected from church. On today's podcast, a Christian singer-songwriter who wrote, amongst others, You Laid Aside Your Majesty and All Heaven Declares. He also pioneered the Champion of the World event at Wembley Stadium in 1997, and only last month was involved at the international worship gathering called This Is the Day at the Puskás Stadium in Hungary. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to this podcast Noel Richards. Noel, thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure. Good to be with you.
Yeah, really, I'm grateful that you can spend time to do this. Before we go to the 5 questions, it starts as for 10 sort of thing. After intensive research about yourself, namely Wikipedia and stuff.
There's not much on Wikipedia.
Well, you'd be surprised because it says that your birthplace was Llantrisant. That means I now know 3 things about Llantrisant. One,
right.
The Royal Mint was there. And 2, in my days growing up in Bristol, I always used to listen to Red Dragon Radio, and there was an advert that would come on incessantly called Leeks of Llantrisant, which was like a departmental store or something.
Yeah.
I don't know what you remember those times there.
Well, yeah, and I think the family that owns Leeks now own a very nice hotel called the Vale Resort in near Llantrisant, which I've stayed at many times when visiting my family down there. We always go for the bargains if we can get them, because it's a nice hotel, and it's amazing. Just from a little ironmongery store, they've got this huge leisure centre and hotel complex, and they own a castle and everything, all from a little ironmongery shop.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Quite amazing, yeah.
Yeah, we could maybe put a spin onto that and bring in a parable or two as to what happens with a little grain of sand or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a bit of trivia to get us started.
Well, it's great. Well, talking of trivia, here we go. Fingers on the buzzers, no conferring, Noel.
Right.
Actually, I'm gonna be a bit naughty here. I've got a bonus question for you. All be revealed. Question number 1: if you could invite anybody from history for an evening meal, alive or dead, so that you could ask them questions, who would it be?
Very good question. Well, actually, it's a musician.
Great.
And an alive musician. Yeah. I'd actually like to spend some time with a guy called Cat Stevens, or Yusuf Islam, as he now is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Why?
Well, I think when I was just starting out as a singer-songwriter back in the early 70s, then, he was kind of a role model for me, because the kind of folk rock thing, acoustic guitar kind of thing was really where I started. And of course, back there about 71 or 72, he had that big hit with the hymn Morning Is Broken,
which is a classic. On piano.
Yeah, that's right. Rick Wakeman on piano. Yeah, beautiful. And then interesting, his story is how he converted to Islam, or became a Muslim, after quite a traumatic incident where he almost lost his life.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fascinating just to sit down and talk about his journey, spiritual journey, and the songs he's written and the kind of stuff he's done within that community. I think it's kind of interesting.
Well, if you do, tell him he's got one of the, I think, well, the most, as a drummer myself, one of the greatest little drum breaks of all time in Matthew Son. Right at the very end. And it really annoys me when you hear DJs talk over it. It's like, no, you don't talk over that, just like you don't over the love affair, everlasting love. Oh.
Yeah. And
then the Eagles, right. But we won't talk about that either. Great stuff, thank you. Well, I look forward to hearing about that when you meet him. Question 2. Who is your favourite biblical character, or favourite biblical story, or favourite parable?
Well, I was thinking about this. And the one thing that sprung to mind was the incident where Peter spent some time with the Roman centurion. Mm-hmm. And I think what was particularly interesting about that was he kind of got this message from heaven where an assortment of seafood was handed down to him, and basically said, well, enjoy shrimp, lobster, whatever. And he goes, well, I can't do that because it's against the law. And for me, that really, makes it clear that things had changed in the New Testament era after Christ came, that we were no longer subject to an old agreement, but there is a new agreement which supersedes the old. And I think for me, I'm rather sad when people still actually like to embrace the laws of the Old Testament, when actually God says, hey, things have changed. Eat your shrimp and don't worry about seafood. So I think it's quite, it marks a sea change in the way God was thinking about things.
Was there a pun there, sea change, or was it
Oh, no,
change?
that was not intended. No, terrible, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, I should do this for a living.
And maybe that was the first recorded event of a paella in the Bible.
There you go. Who knows?
Who knows? That's a great answer. I like that. And I've got a feeling we'll be coming back to the idea of change later on.
I'm sure. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we are. Question 3. If you're Prime Minister for the day and could change any law or impose a new law, what would it be?
Well, do you want a list?
Just the top one. I'll give you 2. I'll take a serious one and one that you might not think is serious.
Okay, well, this one might not be so serious, but actually it winds me up every time I go back to Britain, is the ridiculous idea of charging passengers every time they get dropped off at an airport.
Oh, brilliant.
I was at Gatwick Airport recently, and I was being picked up by my guitar player. I'd stayed at the hotel there overnight, just a brief visit to the UK. And he was complaining because he had to pay a £5 to pick me up, which is just daylight robbery. And then on the way back later that afternoon, when he dropped me off at the airport, he basically pulled in at the garage which everybody was doing, pulling at the garage by the airport and saying, well, I'd much rather give them a £5 for fuel, which I can use. And all these people were being dropped off at the garage and walking with their bags the 200 or 300 yards to the airport. And I think it's just, just shows that Britain rips people off. And I'd like to actually outlaw those parking charges, and also in supermarkets as well. Because my guitar player, we went to the local supermarket to pick up some food because we were doing a rehearsal at the studio. Mm-hmm. So he was clocked on the camera when he went in. And he wasn't clocked on the way out. But then we went back to Tesco's later in the afternoon to pick something else up, and it clocked him on the way out, and he gets this fine. So then we had to send receipts in and say, look, we were visited twice. Yeah. So I think let's get rid of the cowboy parking charges. Yeah, that's maybe a not serious one. But a serious one would be let's get rid of smart motorways.
Ooh.
Because they're not smart, they are dumb.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, fortunately, we don't have them over here in Northern Ireland, but when I've been back to cross the mainland, it does make you wonder, what's this all about? It really does. Well, there's 2 great things. And
there you go.
To fly the flag for Belfast International Airport, it's only £1 if you come over to drop you off. But if you walk about 300 yards, the long stay car park, we can park there for 10 minutes for free.
Well, here in Mallorca, it's much better. Because up until recently, there was no charge for dropping off or picking up. But now they've basically they've got a new system now whereby you're allowed 15 minutes to drop off and 15 minutes to collect. There's 2 separate areas, one for drop off, one collecting. But the locals have a great idea here. They just all queue up outside. So rather than go in and have to pay, they all queue up on the road outside.
Yeah.
And it's wonderful because there's no cameras. See, that's another thing. There's no cameras. So when you go to the airport in Mallorca, you've got all these people waiting until their relatives, friends come out of the airport and call them and go, right, come pick me up.
Exactly.
So that's how they avoid all the charges.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
Different here.
Yeah. Yeah. When I was at Luton Airport 2 months ago, I said to my friend, look, you're not paying the exorbitant charge. I'll go and walk and meet you in the furthest car park that's free. 3 hours later, I eventually arrived there, but it saved him £5. Good stuff. Question 4. Outside of family events, what has been your most enjoyable day out?
Oh, well, it's very difficult to answer a question like this because there's lots of enjoyable days. But I was thinking about a time, actually, when Trish and I went on a rail trip across Europe. Mm-hmm. So back in 2017, we bought an Interrail pass.
Oh, brilliant.
And put our travel guitars on our back and did a sort of trip around Europe. Fantastic. Backpacking with our guitars and stopping off and doing gigs in various places.
Brilliant.
And the idea started because Trish wanted to travel on the Glacier Express in Switzerland. And we could do it with the Interrail pass. and it starts in Italy, and not far from Lake Como. Can't remember what the station's called now. And then it's like a 3-hour ride. It's not really an express because it's dead slow, but right up into the Swiss Alps, and it's just absolutely breathtaking scenery. And eventually arrives in Switzerland, at a city in Switzerland, and it's just a fantastic journey if you can ever do it. And the best way to do it is do it yourself. So you pay hardly anything for doing it. You see all these expensive holidays advertised in the newspapers in the UK, but you can actually do it quite cheaply. So we did it as part of an interrail journey. It was the most amazing, stunning journey right up into the Swiss Alps.
With or without snow?
Loads of snow. A clear sunny day. It was May, and it was a beautiful sunny day, and everywhere was just glistening with snow. Just spectacular.
Wow. Well, that's brilliant. I like that. Last question, sir, before we get to your bonus question. And no one's ever had a bonus question before. You'll find out why in a minute.
I will, yeah, right. Catch me on the hop.
What has been your most embarrassing moment?
Well, I've probably had lots of embarrassing moments, so I was struggling trying to remember which ones. And I suppose one that occurs to me was when I was much younger and I just started in secondary school. Mm-hmm. And, you know, when you're in the first year at secondary school, you want to kind of get involved in the school community and, you know, not be seen as a prat, you know, so. And the teacher asked us if we would like to sell some raffle tickets to raise funds for the school. And I thought, what a great idea.
Yeah.
So I got a book of 10 raffle tickets and went home and invited my parents to buy some tickets. And my dad was not very happy and insisted I take the raffle tickets back to the teacher and say, we don't do that because we're Christians and we don't gamble.
Yes.
Which was a very embarrassing moment for me because now I had to take this back and go, my dad doesn't want me to do that. I mean, that's not to paint my parents in a bad light. They were great parents. They were wonderful. But, you know, unfortunately in the 60s, Christianity was rather legalistic in the era where we were. And, you know, raffle tickets, gambling, I don't think so. It was all for a good cause, but it was quite embarrassing for me as a sort of an 11-year-old to have to say, sorry, my parents don't want me to do this. Anyway, there you go.
No, thank you. Yeah, I'm sure we can hear a lot of people go, yes, been there, seen it. Yeah, I can hear that. Thank you for sharing that. So your bonus question then.
Okay.
Champion of the World, 1997, Wembley.
Yep.
I actually interviewed you there. The question is, where did I interview you?
Where did you interview? Oh, right. Okay. It would have been quite close to the Royal Box, I would have thought.
No. Actually, no.
You didn't?
It was after. It was literally within 15 minutes of it all closing. And I interviewed you afterwards.
I cannot remember. I am sorry, but my mind is a blank.
Well, it's something that stayed with me because... just to paint you as a, you know, it was a really humbling moment for me because other people were saying, "Oh, we can't possibly spend time to be interviewed by you." So I saw you in the distance. We were in between the Twin Towers themselves and the old Wembley Stadium on the top foyer, and I went up to you and I said, "Look, from UCB as I was at the time, can I have a few minutes to interview you?" And you said, "Sure, not at all. I've got to go and get changed. You can interview me whilst getting changed." And we then found a cleaning cupboard. Right in the centre of the Twin Towers. So I went in there and interviewed you whilst you were getting changed. And it was...
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah, I remember that ever since, that it doesn't matter who you are. You were able to spend time with little old me. It was fantastic.
Oh, well, glad I was able to do that.
Yeah, I remember that. So, right, well, from Champion of the World in 1997, let's bring it right up to date first of all. That's all right, because we've got so much to talk about. You were in Hungary last month.
Yes.
At the Puskás Stadium, for those that know football like I do. Puskás, great player, now had a stadium named after him, which I think is a very great thing to do. Why were you there, sir?
Oh, right. I'll try and make the story as brief as possible.
Please.
But at Wembley Stadium, there were a number of things that happened. There was a young guy who was living in London at the time who was Hungarian. And he wanted to go to the stadium for Champion of the World and wave the Hungarian flag.
Wow.
So he basically made a Hungarian flag out of paper napkins, red, green, and white, and wrote Hungary on the white bit in the middle.
Wow.
And when we were singing Champion of the World and videoing the event, I was singing the final song, the camera panned to the Hungarian flag, which was interesting.
Yeah.
So if you ever look at the video in the few closing moments of the event and Champion of the World, you'll see the Hungarian flag being waved, which was made out of paper napkins.
Fantastic.
And on the same day, a couple of friends in our church who had a connection with Hungary, they said, we see Wembley as the beginning, not the end of a journey. And we would suggest that events like this need to happen in stadiums across Europe, like Berlin, Budapest, Barcelona. So there was that sort of connection there. And then we did the video. We put that out on general release. And there was this businessman called Victor Laszlo in Budapest who saw the video, saw the Hungarian flag being waved, which inspired him. And he thought, we need to do that in Budapest.
Yeah.
And this couple had given me the letter. They were also friends with Victor. So in 1998, they connected us. And I went to Budapest for the first time in 1998, met Victor, and with a group of friends, we went to the old Puskás Stadium and prayed that one day there would be a worship event held in the stadium. And then Victor, from the early 2000s, I think my first visit to Budapest for a gig was 2001. And so from 2001 onwards, Victor has been organizing huge events in Hungary mainly, but also in Romania and surrounding countries, basically with the goal of getting people one day into the stadium. And I said to him after a few years of going there, I said, why don't we just use the Puskás Stadium? He goes, no, we want to wait for the new stadium to be built. And of course, they built a brand new stadium, which was opened in 2019. And we were there for the opening event, which was Hungary against Uruguay football game, because we were in the middle of a road show, which was taking in, I think, about 25, 30 cities in Central Europe to promote the event in 2020. But then, of course, the pandemic hit, and the event had to be postponed in 2020 and 21, and took place just a few weeks ago on July 23rd. 40,000 people in the stadium. That was absolutely fantastic. And it was the result of what we did at Wembley all those years ago and subsequent years of traveling to Budapest and supporting the team there as they've got on and done it.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, as you say, from 1997, Wembley, which was the old stadium, now you've gone there. And you alluded right at the beginning that, obviously there have been seed changes. In your road shows, gigs, worship events, whatever we should call them these days, what have you seen in the way of changes spiritually?
Oh, that's a huge question. I'm trying to
break it down.
I think the changes have come for me basically because one of the things we realized was that if we were going to see other events happening in other countries, then we had to invest in those places and travel to those places. And I've often likened it to, you have a mountaintop experience, which for us was what Wembley was, to play at Wembley Stadium, that venue of legends. But then, it's like a mountain peak experience. But if you're going to climb other mountains, you have to come off the mountain peak, go down into the valley and start another climb. So I think for us, it was definitely, going on another journey. As we traveled throughout Europe and other countries, encouraging people to come to an event we did in Berlin in 2007. Was that right? No, 2000. Yeah, 2000. I'm just trying to think now. Was that 2006 or 2007? No, it was 2006. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Right. So I remember watching it on God TV, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, we did that in 2006. and realizing that as I was traveling, I was getting more and more tired of leading worship events because it seemed that, I was having to deliver an experience,
Yeah.
which I can't do. I'm just a singer-songwriter. I sing songs. I can lead people in worship. I can facilitate, if you like, worship through the songs that we bring. But I found that increasing pressure to actually make something happen.
Yeah.
That there were all these like worship nights happening and people had an expectation of something dynamic happening. And I remember as I was traveling in the latter years of like 2007 to 2010, probably, with a friend of mine, particularly in Germany, starting worship events and thinking, oh, I can't wait for this to be over. Because I was getting tired of just doing that and the expectation people had for some sort of spiritual experience that I could provide.
Yes.
And so I think for me, I got tired, a little tired of what I would say leading worship or doing worship events.
Yeah.
Because I think I was being asked to do something I couldn't do, which was give people an experience, and you can't do that. So, since probably 2010, Trish and I have gone back to our roots as songwriters and just thought, well, let's write songs about our life. Let's write songs about stuff that people go through. Let's take a step back from that whole sort of worship bubble. And let's not stop doing worship songs. Let's include them in our sets. But I think wherever we go, we can, what can I say, help people to encounter the God who is present. So you don't stop being, in quotes, a worship leader or somebody who's able to connect people with the presence of God.
Yeah.
But we've been doing it in a different way over these last 10 or 12 years, basically. And just doing concerts where we share our songs and let what happens happen to people. Yeah.
I think what you're trying to say then, if I got this right, is that when Billy Graham in his heyday came to town, he actually had a separate worship leader in Cliff Barrows to lead the singing, the community singing, the choirs, everything, and then that would just leave Billy to come on and do what he did best. But it seems as if everybody expected you to be Cliff Barrows and Billy Graham all rolled into one, and also to make the sandwiches as well, maybe.
Yes, that's right. I think this whole thing of worship events became bigger than what we expected it to be. I think when we were traveling around the UK, encouraging people to come to Wembley Stadium, we just going back. I think what started me was seeing somebody like Ishmael all those years ago, doing his praise parties.
Yeah,
and actually, you realize that actually worshiping God could be fun.
Yes.
And he'd do these after-hours praise parties at an event called Spring Harvest, where it would just be fun. And there was no expectation other than we'll just let our hair down and we'll have a good time. Because it is fun to sing these songs. And, Ishmael's songs were always a lot of fun for kids of all ages. So when we started doing our worship concerts, I suppose we sort of decided to put on just a show. So we had dancers with us. We did no holds barred, just fun. We just did a full-on concert. And I think there were times in those concerts where people, had an encounter with God, particularly as we included songs like You Laid Aside Your Majesty, All Heaven Declares, where people had a chance to engage with the God who is present. But we weren't under any pressure.
Yes.
And also we were taking people on a journey and said, come to Wembley. We're going to have a great praise party at Wembley Stadium.
Yeah.
And, Wembley Stadium was not going to change the world, but it was going to change the world of the people who came there.
Yes.
But I think what happens was we got into this thing of every event is going to be a world-changing event, but it's not like that. And I think, you realize you can't meet those expectations.
Yes.
So, you just basically take a step back and say, well, this is what we can do. And if it works for you, then that's great.
Brilliant. You just said there in Ishmael, or I think his real name was Ian Smale, isn't it? Something like that.
Ian Smale, that's his name.
Yeah, I remember reading his autobiography, and one of his previous bands he was in was called Rev Counter and the Speedos, which I thought was a great name. So what other bands have you been in with names like that maybe?
No, I used to gig with Ish when he was in the old Rev Counters band. I mean, I've known Ish since the mid-'70s.
Wow.
When I was working down in Plymouth with Youth for Christ down there. So we would put on these concerts at the YMCA in Plymouth, and Ish was a regular visitor. And he would always take the mick out of me. You know, it was like whenever we were playing, he would be standing in the sidelines just laughing and giggling and just teasing us. He's always been like that. It's kind of our relationship.
Yeah.
But no, he said to me years ago, he said, just be yourself, you know, be what you are. Don't try and be what we are. Because I loved what he was doing with the Rev Counter and the Speedos. But he said, look, no, he says, you can't be what we are, you know, just be what you are and do that to the best of your ability, which is great advice. And that's what I've been trying to do ever since. But yeah, so we go back a long way, and we keep in touch, and he calls me Knobs. That's he's always called me Knobs. I don't know why.
Really?
And we used to do songwriting conferences together, you know, and confuse everybody, because I'd talk about crafting songs and, you know, making sure the songs really worked. And he goes, well, if you can't write an album in 20 minutes, you're useless. So we would confuse everybody at our songwriting conferences. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was Mark Bowden saying he'd write a song in about 5 minutes, you know, and just go to number one.
Yeah, I know.
Wow. I could talk about this for hours, music with you. It's brilliant. However, right at the very beginning, in my introduction, I say those are people are disillusioned and disconnected from church. You know, this is a podcast from them. And what really connected myself with your website was a little podcast you did yourself on why you don't go to church anymore.
Yes.
And that was a phenomenal thing, because it was like clickbait. All of a sudden, I've got to listen to that. But by the time I heard it, I thought, wow, that really makes sense. So I'd like you to share, please, if that's all right, what you actually meant by that, and what feedback, if anything, you've had as a result of it, please.
Oh, yeah. I mean, encouraging feedback, to be honest with you.
Good.
Because I think people understood the spirit of what I was trying to communicate.
Yes.
So, you know, my background is I grew up in South Wales in a Pentecostal church. Great family, great parents. They've been so encouraging to me over the years. And my mum, who's still alive, is still a great encouragement, you know, and still prays for me every day. But I think back then the kind of church environment we were in was very legalistic. And everything was around going to church and dressing for church, and that whole thing on a Sunday being the Lord's Day. And then when Trish and I moved to Cobham in Surrey back in 1980, and we'd been part of a youth church for quite a while, which was quite, you know, different and unusual. But we still had a lot of baggage, I think, from our early experience of, you know, being much more legalistic as Christians. And then I remember when I finally got the opportunity to lead worship one Thursday evening, and that was an interesting thing, because our church, Cobham Christian Fellowship, met on a Thursday, not on a Sunday. So I said, well, why don't we meet on the Lord's Day? And they went, well, because there isn't a Lord's Day, because every day is the Lord's Day. So he's not Lord on Sunday, he's Lord on Friday, he's Lord on Thursday. So when every day is the Lord's Day, then that affects the way we behave every day, not just on a Sunday. And I remember leading worship on this Thursday evening, and the guy leading the meeting said, well, that's great, we'll see you all in September. And this was like the end of June. And I said to him, look, I said, Mick, I said, did I hear you right? You know, there's no more public meetings until September. And he said, yeah, that's right. People are on holiday, people are away, there's no point in having them. And I said, well, you might find you haven't got a church in September. And he said, well, if we haven't got a church in September, we haven't got a church now. And he was making the point that this particular church, Cobham Christian Fellowship, was not about meetings. It was about life and community and sharing God's love with one another on a daily basis. And actually, the church continued throughout the summer. The only thing that didn't happen was a public meeting. But people continued to support the church financially. People continued to meet in home groups. People continued to meet with their friends and neighbors for barbecues. Church life continued, but one gathering a week was not what this church was all about. So that's why it came out, I don't go to church, because I suddenly realized you can't go to church, you are the church. And, the church is not a building, but the church is people.
Yeah.
And we're either part of the church or we're not.
Yes.
So church is not something you can, so we never use that phrase in Cobham, going to church. And it's never been for 30, 40 years. It's not been in our thinking that we go to church. We stopped going to church in 1980.
Yes.
But we were part of a church for many years.
Yeah.
And that was, I know it's a play on words, but it's a very important thing.
Yeah, it certainly made me think when I heard it. I was like, yeah, I understand that now. So yes, it was. I'm glad I clickbaited it.
Yes, and then what happened was back in 2004, the church had come to the end of its life. Right. The Cobham Christian Fellowship, or Pioneer People, as it had then become, had run its course, and the guy that started it, Gerald Coates, he also closed it down. Oh, and in 2004, we were all, to use the language of the time, we were all released to go and be part of something else or do whatever we felt God was asking us at that time. But Pioneer People was ending.
Wow.
But of course, those relationships didn't end, although the structure of what was Pioneer People came to an end, our relationships continued. So we have continued with the relationships that meant something to us because, we were a community. So we continued with a group of friends, maybe 20, 30 of us, that we were a group of friends anyway within that church. So we continued meeting on an occasional basis, maybe once a month, once every 5 weeks. We should be very informal. And that was our church community. I remember a local Baptist minister saying, well, don't you feel you need to go to a meeting on a Sunday? I went, no, I stay home and read the papers and drink coffee. And then, but I'm in community. I'm with the people I've been part of for the last 30 years. Yes. And so we're being church. We are church. We're just not meeting on a Sunday, but we're meeting maybe once a month. But we're meeting in our homes. We're praying for one another. We're caring for one another. We're supporting those who are in need. So that's been, that was our experience of church post a structured church.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned Gerald Coates because at the beginning, I gave you immense credit for being able to interview me whilst you were getting changed in a store cupboard at Wembley Stadium. Yeah. And I had the privilege, and I genuinely mean that, because I suppose my background is always open to people telling me, shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that. And, and of course, back in the 80s and 90s, Gerald Coates was a bit Marmite to some people, if you know what I mean. And I had an offer to go and interview him in the 1990s down in Telford at a Christian event. And there were at least two people within UCB who were like, Gerald Coates, all sorts of stuff. But I went down and he blew my mind with his humility. The fact that he was prepared to spend time to be interviewed by me. And it was middle of February, and I interviewed Gerald in his battered up BMW, sitting outside Starbucks, drinking a cup of coffee with the rain absolutely pounding down. And I interviewed him in his car. And I realised then that, I shouldn't always listen to rumours until you actually meet the person. And it's a pity that he's no longer with us because I'd love to interview him again. What's your memory of Gerald Coates?
Oh, gosh. We worked together closely for so many years. My first encounter with Gerald, again, back in the late 70s, he was this controversial house church leader that basically said it like it was. I mean, he said the things that most people only think about.
Yes.
And Trish and I were part of this youth church down in Plymouth at the time. We just got married in 1978. And Gerald was invited to do I think it was called an All Saints Night at the big Anglican church in Plymouth. And our church was invited to lead the worship. So we arrived, Trish and myself and my music team, and we were setting up, and we looked out into the auditorium, or the church itself, and that was our first meeting with Gerald. He was actually there helping to put the chairs out.
Wow.
Which was very unusual, because most preachers, visiting preachers, were so full of themselves and didn't do things like that.
Yeah.
And this was the first Christian leader I think I met who I thought had, that touch of humility about him. So and then he then after this event spent 2 nights with our church telling us his life story, and
Wow.
it was hilarious, outrageous, blew us away. We'd never listened to anybody who was so non-religious as this person, and so much on a level. I mean, he was talking about people that, he was friends with, people like Sir Cliff Richard, Rick Parfitt of Status Quo, and we're thinking, this guy's, and he was outrageous.
I would have just stopped there. So look, don't talk about anything else. Let's just talk about the Quo, please. That would have been me.
He was outrageously funny.
Yeah.
And, I traveled with him all over the world. And it was just incredible, to see how he destroyed the sacred cows of religiosity. And it was a privilege to have done that for all those years. And so, yes. So, you said, do I have a hero? But
We'll find out who might be later on.
It would be difficult to talk about Gerald. I've talked about him like that. In one sense, I never see him as a hero because he was my mate. That was the thing. Yeah. So I can't really go over that ground again. But just to say that what he put into us as a group of people, we're still living with now. This whole idea of non-religious Christianity, that church is something you're part of, not something you go to. That and he basically just hit away all those sacred cows, and we ended up hopefully living in a sense of reality. And that's what we're grateful for.
Yeah. Well, we'll find out whether Gerald Coates is your Christian hero at the at the end. I've got a feeling it might be, but you just never know. But leading on from that, how he was blowing up literally. Yeah, word-wise, that's right. The sacred cows. Why are so many people, do you think, turning their backs on church today? Not on God, but on church.
I think they're realizing that it's there are other ways that we can be living, and other ways in which we can be church. I mean, Martin Scott, who you said you're going to be interviewing, Martin said, it's like, well, when you talk about church, is what you mean, what sort of definition of church are you talking about?
Yes.
And if your definition of church is a building where people sit in rows and listen to somebody talking out the front and have worship done to them by a band that sings songs, a kind of a consumer-based way of doing things, if you go to the States, you can basically have that, because it's a product that you can buy every Sunday. That probably is true in a lot of other countries as well. And you call that church. Whereas if you look in the New Testament, where 2 or 3 are gathered, I am there. That's what Jesus said. So church is anything from 2 or 3 gathered around a table, which actually, to me, is far more what church is all about than sitting looking at the back of somebody's head and having something done to me every Sunday. So, for me, breaking bread, one of the big things that Gerald used to get criticized over was, well, Pioneer People or Cobham Christian Fellowship don't have communion every Sunday. To which he said, well, what, you think having a nip and a sip and thinking of Jesus hanging across with all the clouds, the fluffy clouds floating in the sky, is actually going to do anything? Basically, his idea of communion was basically it's people sitting around a table having a meal together. And whenever you sit around the meal table, you raise your glasses and remember that we can do this because of what God has done in our lives through Jesus Christ. So, and for me, those are the meaningful times, most of what's happened in my life has happened around the table.
Yeah.
I've been to thousands of meetings over the years, but probably the life-changing events have happened around the table with a group of friends. So I like the definition of church being a group of friends around a table, eating and drinking together, sharing life, and Jesus is in the midst. So it just depends how you define church. And I think a lot of people are not against church, but I think they are against a particular model of church, which doesn't meet their needs and doesn't connect with them.
I've asked, you seem to be saying the same things other people have on previous podcasts. And one of the things that I'm a big believer in is conversation. Just be able to talk to somebody, ask those questions in a safe environment so you can learn. That's how I've learned. That's why I'm still a Christian today, because there have been some people in my Bristol days especially who realised that I was a rough diamond in the making, not even a rough diamond, and prepared to spend time with us. So conversation was key. But other people who have been on the podcast also have said, well, this is what we need to do now. So for those people that are listening today that are broken, are just so fed up, despondent with church life, what would you say to them?
I would say just spend time with your friends and invest in those friendships, those life links that you have, which is what we do here in Mallorca. We have a circle of friends, some of whom are Christians, and probably the greater majority of them are people who don't have any faith whatsoever.
Yeah.
But we spend time with our friends, we have community, and God breaks into those times, which is just absolutely incredible. We have a couple of friends, and this couple, he's Swedish and she's Irish. And her father, who was in his 90s, died during the pandemic in Ireland, and she couldn't go to his funeral. So she, being a kind of a Catholic in the loosest sense of the word, arranged for a mass to be said last year at the local Catholic church. So she invited us to come to the mass. Mm-hmm. And it was just on a regular Wednesday evening mass in the Catholic church across the street from where they have an apartment. So we went there. There was just five of us friends. Wow. And I missed the whole thing that the priest did for her father, because he just mentioned him in prayers, And I was sitting in the Catholic church, and I was thinking, well, all this grandeur and everything, and where's God in all of this? And I just felt God saying, well, I'm here, I'm here in all of this, even though it's not your cup of tea, I'm here.
Yeah.
So, and these people that are here are sincere. So, Noel, I don't approve of everything you do, but I'm with you. And then afterwards, we sat around the table having drinks and food together, and in just a general conversation, And I would say Trish and I were the only ones who really would, have what I'd say a living faith. Mm-hmm. I just said, can we just pause a second? I said, it was a very special time having the mass tonight. I said, can we just, raise our glasses and thank God for your father? Mm. And they all did. So I think we bring God into the everyday stuff of life.
Yeah.
And because that's the way it's meant to be. It's not meant to be like, and now sign on the dotted line and give your life to Jesus. Yeah. It's just, no, here we are. And with another couple of friends last year, and the wife said in passing, she said, do you, what was the question? I'm just trying to think now, but it was like, do you believe that when we die, there's something after this? And I said, of course we do. That. We got faith, So you bring those questions in. You bring those answers into those questions. And, we're not under pressure to see people saved and put bums on seats. We're under pressure we're not under pressure. We're just wanting to be friends and allow God to break into those everyday situations as and when.
Yeah.
So our friends who don't have any faith, they know what we stand for. And, but they know that we're not their friends because we want to see them saved. We're their friends because we're their friends.
Yeah.
So I think let's take the pressure off trying to do something. Let's enjoy living in this world, living with our friends, both friends that have faith and both friends that don't have faith, and just be grateful and just be available.
Yeah. I hear that. You said, obviously from Llantrissant, you're now in Mallorca. Before we find out why you're in Mallorca now, just a quick question, something you alluded to. When did you actually become a Christian, Noel?
Let's see. I suppose the first time I kind of made a prayer of commitment, I might have been about 9 years old, because that was the environment I was in.
Yeah.
You need to get right with God, and because you might go to hell, or your parents might get raptured and you'll be left behind, which of course was nonsense because the rapture is a fiction. But those were the things we lived with. So I suppose my first response to God when I was 9 years old was probably out of fear. Didn't want to get left behind, didn't want to lose my parents, didn't want to fall under a London bus and get killed, which was unlikely in Wales.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah. And then, I think the problem is then when you have when you're brought up on stories of a God that is a fearful God, I've often thought about this. I'm going to do a podcast about it. I think what I'm doing with these podcasts is I'm kind of bearing my soul.
Yeah.
And hopefully people will hear where I'm coming from. But, my whole upbringing was listening to stories about a God who committed genocide, flooded the earth, killed the firstborn, wiped out armies, got people who didn't do what he told them swallowed by whales or turned into pillars of salt.
Wales, not the country.
Not
animal.
Wales, the country. Yeah, that's right. And so, I was confronted with a God that basically wasn't very nice.
Yeah.
And we had choruses about it. So we sang songs about God killing people and God flooding the earth and all this sort of stuff. And if you don't, put your trust in God, God will do bad things to you. So I think the basis of me coming to faith was like a very shaky foundation, because then they go, well, God loves you. I go, well, is God bipolar or something? Because at one moment he's killing people and he loves me. And if I don't do what he tells me, then he'll kill me.
Yeah.
So I think I was very confused. And then when I was 15, that was kind of a turning point in my life, because we had a new pastor come to our church straight out of Bible college, a guy called John Glass, who later became the general secretary of the Elim movement. And we still keep in touch to these days.
Wow.
And John mentored me and encouraged me as a musician, singer, songwriter. So I'm doing what I'm doing today because he invested in my own life. He was a musician as well, and he was the first, cool pastor I'd ever met, and took me to my first Christian concert.
Where was that?
That was a thing called It's Buzz, which was in 1971.
Oh, right.
Organized by a guy called Pete Meadows.
Meadows. Oh, yes.
Yeah. Yes. He was the host. And I was 16 at the time, and we went to this big concert venue called the Colston Hall in Bristol.
Know it so well.
Yeah. Probably about 2,000 people in there, I would think, because it was packed out. And I'd never been to a concert in my life, because Christians were not allowed to go to concerts because that was worldly.
Right.
So everything that I grew up with was worldly. So you couldn't smoke, you couldn't drink, you couldn't go to pubs, you couldn't go to discos, because it was all worldly. You couldn't go to football games because that was worldly. Certainly couldn't dance because that was worldly. And jokingly said, why do Christians, not make love standing up? Because it might lead to dancing. Anyway, I wanted to get that joke in. So we went to the Colston Hall, but on the way during that day, because we had a whole day out of it, I think it was 15 of us in this youth group, 15 or 20 of us that John took in a minibus.
Yeah.
We went ice skating and 10-pin bowling before the gig.
In Frogmore Street, the ice rink, just behind the Colston Hall. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And I'd never been ice skating or 10-pin bowling before, and I thought, this is fantastic. And John got into terrible trouble with the deacons the next day, because when we went ice skating, they were playing worldly music, playing rock and roll. So he got into terrible trouble because he'd taken us to a den of iniquity. But that was a life-changing moment for me, because that's when I saw a young Graham Kendrick singing on the stage and thought, that's what I want to do with the rest of my life.
Ah, right.
So you see, religious people always miss it. They always criticize, but that was a God moment for me.
Well, the elders will be pleased to know that the ice rink in Frogmore Street is no more. It's been taken over. It's now a student accommodation.
Here's another funny little thing. Like I started doing coffee bars in South Wales, and I was like 16 or 17. And I remember going to this one Elim church, this Porth Elim church in the Rhondda Valley. And what we used to do in those days was we used to sort of put, fishing nets up on the ceiling and coloured lights in and all that to make it look sort of like a nightclub sort of thing.
Yeah.
Bring people in. And this deacon went ape. This older deacon, he's dead now, he knows better. But this deacon shouted at us and everything because we put a red light outside the church building. And he said, you're going to attract the wrong kind of people.
Yeah, because red light spells danger.
I didn't know what a red light did.
Yeah.
Being a sheltered Pentecostal, I didn't know that red light signified having a good time. So he said, we don't want to attract the wrong people in. Actually, these were the people we needed to be attracted in.
Yeah.
So, religion always misses it.
Yeah.
That's it. Anyway, that was my early experience. And I think, I've had to unlearn an awful lot as in my adult life. That, if God is my father, if God loves me, then certainly he's not this ferocious, fearful God of the Old Testament.
Yes.
He can't be one thing and be something else. So either God loves us or he doesn't.
Yes. Well, if I ever get to Mallorca, I'll be driving along trying to find a house with a red light outside because it's bound to be yours. Why are you in Mallorca now, sir?
Why? Well, this small group of people that we were fellowshipping with, our friendship group, if you like, in Cobham in Surrey, the couple that were kind of in a sense leading that, they were leading a kind of youth work in the area, which was great. It was life-changing for so many young people in the schools in the area, and the work still continues to this day. But they felt their time was coming to an end. And they were looking for other places to go. And they thought of maybe joining 24/7 in Ibiza. But they'd been to Mallorca on a visit and they just kind of connected with the place. So they decided that's where they wanted to be for the next stage of their life. And so we went out with them while they settled in. We just went for 3 months over the winter period because we had some Christian friends on the island. So a small group of 7 of us moved out there, and it was just basically friends going out there. And, we spent 3 months, which actually became 9 months. We stayed longer and then realized that's where we felt most at home. Wow. And this has become our home since 2010. So, this is where we belong.
Have you seen, I suppose it's Mallorcans, is it people from Mallorca?
Yeah.
Mallorcans, have you noticed, are they more open to Christianity compared to other parts?
I think there's a spirituality on the island. One of the things that we noticed was, there was a real spirituality amongst a lot of people here on the island. Probably, engaging in some stuff that wasn't particularly helpful, but definitely the island is, I would say, is a very spiritual place. People who come here, they start to unwind, they relax. There's something about the place which is, it's got its problems like anywhere, but it certainly is a place where it's just a place of beauty. I mean, last night we went to a little location which we hadn't been to for a while. It's where people go to watch the sun go down.
Yeah.
And we just went there on the way home we'd spent the afternoon at the beach. We don't go to the beach that often, but we went yesterday afternoon, and I said, let's just check out this area. I haven't been there for a while. And we were only going to stay there 5 minutes, but the sun was going down, and we just stayed there probably for an hour. And probably about 60 or so people all gathered at this place, and all ages, some with picnics and stuff like that, and just plonked down a little sheet and got some beers and stuff, and they were just watching the sun going down. And you think, that's great. People come here every night and just watch the sun going down.
Yeah.
They take time to do it, and you realize when you're on the island that you slow down. And I think that's part of living, that God doesn't want us to live at this frenetic pace. So I think, there's a strong Catholic culture here, of course, because it's a Catholic country. And some of the Catholics we've met, they just have incredible, strong faith.
Yeah.
I think yeah, it's a place where there are, evangelical churches as well, but we just haven't felt connected with them because you get sucked into that bubble and you don't have time for other friends because it becomes a bubble that's separate from the rest of the world. So we have deliberately not got involved in that.
And then you see, oh, you play guitar. Off you go, sir. And you go, oh, no, please no. Well, you mentioned sunset, which obviously means towards the end of the day. Unfortunately, we're running out of time as well for this podcast. I'd like to say, first of all, before we get to find out who your Christian hero is, this has been a BCSC production. And if there's anything you'd like to comment on or want to know any more information, please email us to OGC, that's OGC, Off-Grid Christianity, OGC at accessradio.biz, accessradio.biz, and biz is spelled B-I-Z. Noel, I could listen to you for hours on your stories. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd just like you to end off, please. You have 2 minutes to discuss who your Christian hero is. Just give us a bit of a biography about him, and I'll leave the rest to you. Thank you, good sir.
Okay. Well, since we talked about Gerald Coates, who was one of the leading figures of the house church movement, which is now known as the New Church movement, I've got one story about him, which is absolutely hilarious. Great. We were in New Zealand in 1984 for a conference, charismatic conference. It was going really well. People were relaxed and informal. And then on the Sunday, the religious spirit descended. And I arrived at the venue early because I was setting up with the worship band, and noticed that there was a huge table set up with a white sheet covering it, and I knew what was underneath there. It was the bread and the wine. We were now into religious Sunday morning communion in the middle of a non-religious Christian conference. I said to the organizers, I said, he ain't going to like this, meaning Gerald. And sure enough, half an hour later, Gerald arrived, and it was like I could see that he was not happy with the way that we had now gone from freedom into legalism, faith into formality. So when he got up to preach, he stood up and he said, of all the meetings in the church calendar, this is the one I hate the most. And this, as he took hold of the white tablecloth and pulled it off, said, this does not help at all. Gasp, shock, horror. And then he said, we are trying to be non-religious here now. We've gone into this religious thing. And he started to eat the bread. And people were shouting at him, going, you can't do that. He goes, why? We'll all grab some in a few minutes. I'm just having mine early. And he killed the sacred cow of communion. It's one of those moments I was going, yep, that's it. We've got to nail this thing on the head. We can't be schizophrenic. We can't be saying we want to live life, in faith, in a non-religious way, and then descend every Sunday into this ridiculous charade. And it was hilarious. People getting quite irate because he was eating the bread early.
And what about the wine?
And the wine. Well, it wasn't real wine, was it? Yeah, I think it was some sort of red grape juice or whatever. And, so that's one of the sort of great stories of Gerald destroying sacred cows. Wow. And I think I must be out of my 2 minutes now.
Well, that is fantastic. And I remember actually asking Gerald about a prophecy, which I think I'll ask Martin Scott about, because he's into the prophetic, about a prophecy he gave in New Zealand. And,
right.
Yeah. It was a phenomenal answer that he gave me on that. Noel Richards, thank you so much for spending time today. It's been a real privilege hearing from you, and hope we can meet up again soon. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I hope people get help with the podcast. And
thank you very much, Lisa.
Yeah, cheers. Pleasure. Thank you.